Hey everyone, welcome to this lecture where we're going to look at not only how many organisms are in a population, but we're going to look at how they're distributed. So the whole goal of this lecture is we're going to look at these different levels of complexity, and that you have that picture there on the left. We're going to delve into that in a little more detail as we move on, showing how we can study just an individual and then how that individual correlates in the entire biosphere. And we're going to look at certain characteristics of population, especially what we look for in regards to, well, we want to look and maybe see if a population is growing or declining, or what makes a population successful. And finally, what we're going to look at are these density dependent and density independent factors that are going to either put strain on a population, causing them to decline, or things that they may need that, again, allows them to succeed. So let's get right into it. We're going to look at these levels of complexity. And again, we're starting at the most simple. And the most simple is just that individual. And to make things easy, we're always going to take a look at the left. So we're going to stick with our rabbit there. And the individual this is where natural selection is operating. If you think back to evolution, remember, natural selection is that survival of the fittest. It's not just who's the strongest. It's what characteristics does that rabbit have in order for it to survive and succeed in its environment. And remember, and if you can succeed in your environment, you get to reproduce, which leads us to population. So we're not going to look at just one rabbit. We're going to look at all those rabbits in that same species, because this is where one, evolution is going to occur. And the whole goal of this is, we had that individual with a certain set of traits. That individual is going to succeed and be able to reproduce, and that's where we're going to see these small changes over time, generations passing down genetic information, and so on. So that's where the populations go on. From there, that population isn't solely on its own existing in nature. It has that community. There's other things happening where this population has to deal with. It could be predators. It could be the amount of food or water in an area. So when we look at a community, we're looking at all the populations, not only all of them, but how they interact. I already mentioned predator. How many wolves or coyotes are in this area that could affect that population of rabbits? How often does it rain for that grass to succeed and grow to provide a food source? So again, we got to look at the community, not just the population as well. Finally, that community was looking at mostly the biotic factors. When we look at an ecosystem, remember, we have to talk about the abiotic factors. I did mention the amount of water that needs to fall in order for the grass to grow. Those would be the abiotic components. And it's very important to understand that when we're studying, again, just that one individual. In mentioning water, we also have to include energy. How much sunlight's coming in, and going back to that idea which we've discussed earlier in regards to trophic levels. How much energy is there? How much is moving up that pyramid? Finally, it's all interconnected. I think you're figuring that out at this point in this course is, what's happening in a certain area on Earth will have its effects somewhere else. And a perfect example is just climate change. The climate may be changing. It may be getting warmer. How is this population of rabbits going to respond? Is their food source going to succeed? Are we going to see a lot more rabbits due to this changing climate? Or is their food source going to decline, and are we going to see a decline in the rabbits? So again, here's your levels of complexity. You can't have one without the other, and the whole theme is, we're all interconnected. There's no one way to just look at this individual rabbit and know everything there is to know about it without looking at the Earth as a whole. So that's basically the gist of population ecology. That's what we're going to get into. We're going to look at how the ecosystem affects a certain population's growth and how those populations affect other organisms in the community. And there's these 5 distinct characteristics. We're going to jump in and talk about them right now, but this is a great little chart to refer to. Kind of gives you why it's important, and then also examples are always good to understand as well. So let's get into it. Size is pretty self-explanatory. If I want to know the size of a population, I'm just counting individuals. How many are in this area? As we get further into not just wanting to know the size of the population, but how do they congregate? How many individuals are in this area? And taking that information will lead us into certain things like hunting and fishing limits. You may have heard a lot of the big fish in the oceans are running low, and a lot of this is because we need to do a better job of looking at the population density. So an example of looking at population density could be looking at hunting. Every year, usually in October in the fall, hunting season opens, and there's some regulations, and these are very important. And you can see here by county, this is the number of bucks that are allowed to be shot among all the hunters in that area. In order to have a successful population of bucks, or I'm sorry, deer the next year. And hitting on that, this is why. Couple in 2017, you can see that they limited the amount of hunting that was allowed in the Western United States. This was due to a tough winter. So you can imagine a tough winter causes the deer herd population to go down. So the following fall, you don't want to hand out a ton of these hunting permits allowing these hunters to kill these deer, because it would just devastate the population even more. So again, the whole idea of looking at population density is, can we set these hunting limits and fishing limits in order to have a successful and healthy population? Populations are also going to be distributed in different ways. How do they occupy this space? And a lot of this has to do with the behavior of certain animals and just the success rate of, looking at clumping. If you're a herding animal like elephants or deer or zebras, strength in numbers is huge. You want another set of eyes looking around the area. If we're using the picture on the left here, looking out for lions, predatory animals, the more the better. You're also being together, you have these social interactions. You can have others take care of your young, or you can have, you need mates, they're going to be around. Whereas uniform, it's not as common. We usually see this with predatory, or I shouldn't say predatory, animals that need a certain territory, especially nesting birds. That picture in the middle, that bird they're sitting on their nest. They don't want anyone around them. They will have a certain set of space around them. That's what we mean by uniform. Then finally, random is usually with flowers or trees. Think about it. You have these flowers are going to disperse a ton of different seeds throughout that field. Those seeds are going to randomly land somewhere, and the ones that sprout are the ones that just randomly showed up to a place where there was enough moisture, enough soil, and so on in order for it to succeed. So make sure you understand these three sets of distribution for the organisms. Sex ratio is important. As you can see, all we're looking at is how many males are there to females, and when you look in nature, it's very, very close to 50-50. And that makes perfect sense. If you have a lot of males and only a few females, and then let's use this seal population, you cannot expect to have a large population growth the next year. So what we usually see is this balance of 50-50. Another important thing to look at, and this is going to be very important when we look at human population growth, is the age structure. And notice how they break it up. They break it up into, we're going to start actually in the middle. 15 to 44, those are your reproductive years. Those are the years where you can biologically have a child, physiologically have a child. 0 to 14, preteen, right? Not reproductive, and usually mid-40s and on, those are people that are not having children. That could tell us a lot of information. If we look on the left, we have a large group of 0 to 14. These children are eventually going to get older and be that reproductive age. That's going to tell us those people are going to have children. That population is going to grow rapidly. Looking more over at the slow growth, United States, not a lot of people between 0 and 14. Some of those people, when they hit that reproductive age, some of them are going to have children, some of them aren't, so we can expect slow growth. And then again, if we're going to look again, when we look at human population, a population with a lot of 45 to 85, if it's top heavy, that is definitely telling us that population is either growing slowly or not at all. So there's your population characteristics. Make sure you understand them. We're going to finish off here with density dependent and density independent. Remember, density is how many individuals occupy a certain area, and that's going to be a big factor. So density dependent, these are going to affect its probability of survival. Here you have, in that diagram, you have a snowshoe hare and the lynx, going with that rabbit predator idea again. If there's a lot of snowshoe hares, you can probably expect that lynx population is going to jump up significantly. That's density dependent, right? The success of the lynx is dependent on how many hares there are, and vice versa. If there's not a lot of lynx, you can expect that population of hares to skyrocket because there's not a lot of predators. Perfect example of a density dependent. So the key here is a population is dependent on what is going on in regards to lynx. This could also be an example. Imagine there's maybe a disease going through the population of rabbits or hares. Those population of hares living close to each other, if there's a disease, that's going to probably spread much easier than if there weren't as many. So that's what I mean by a limiting source. So it's this resource that a population cannot live without. So think of it: water, food, mates. That's what I mean by a limiting source. If you remove a limiting source from an ecosystem, you can expect that population to go down. Which leads us to carrying capacity. So any ecosystem is going to have a limit. There's no way we're going to be able to grow and grow and grow and using these resources, because eventually what you're going to hit is, again, make sure you understand what that carrying capacity means. There's only so much oxygen, there's only so much food, predators, and so on that are going to cause this population to level out. So when we see a graph going up and then all of a sudden flattens out, that's the carrying capacity. That's how many individuals can live in that ecosystem successfully. And you can expect if that population overshoots carrying capacity, it will definitely decline. So what are some independent? These are things that it doesn't matter if there's 2 deer here or if there were 200 deer, that forest is going to catch fire. So density independent things are usually things like weather. A tornado comes through. A tornado takes out a certain area of forest. Those deer are injured. It didn't matter, again, if how many deer were there, that tornado came through. This forest fire, it doesn't matter how many are there, it's going to come through. So these are regardless of a population size. So there's your lecture on populations. Remember, you can always go back. You can come see me, whatever you need. I am here. See ya.